From the nation's capital, the Conservative Caucus presents Conservative Roundtable, an in-depth look at today's most important issues.
Welcome to Conservative Roundtable. I'm Howard Phillips, Chairman of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors these broadcasts, and we're pleased to have one of America's top economic experts, Peter Ferrara, as our guest for this broadcast. I've known Peter for a number of years. He's currently Director of Entitlement and Budget Policy for the Institute for Policy Innovation. He's General Counsel for the American Civil Rights Union, which is run by Susan Carlson, the widow of an old friend of mine, Robert Carlson, who did a lot of work for Reagan when Reagan was governor of California. He writes regularly in the American Spectator. He served in the White House Office of Policy Development when Ronald Reagan was president, and he also served as Associate Deputy Attorney General of the U.S. Under the first President Bush. He's a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School, and he wrote an excellent book, The Obamacare Disaster. It was published by the Heartland Institute. He's also been a critic in a written volume of President Obama's Tax Piracy. Peter, what do you think of Bernanke's decision to print more greenbacks, more phony money?
Well, this shows how ridiculously we've gone back right to the 1970s, because Barack Obama's followed the exact Keynesian policy of the 1970s, and now Bernanke is doing the same. You know, I've been predicting for 2 years the result of Obamanomics was going to be the combination of inflation and recession that we had in the 1970s. People don't even remember that anymore.
Amazingly, Sarah Palin had a pretty good comment on
Yes,
this.
she did. Yes, she did. And so what Bernanke's doing is exactly what the Fed did in the 1970s, which created this ruinous inflation. When 1979, 1980, prices rose 25% those 2 years. Yeah. And they had, what they did was they kept creating inflation to get out of the recession, and then they had to throw the country back into recession to stop the inflation, and then they went back to inflation to get out of the recession, and they did that 4 times in a row until Reagan said, no more of this Keynesian economics, and he brought in the modern supply-side economics. So Bernanke is bringing back the same thing. And one of the great failings of Obama and Bernanke, who's been a disaster, and I attribute that to George Bush, because he originally appointed him, although Obama originally reappointed him. One of the most offensive things about Barack Obama is his Rip Van Winkle act, where he makes believe that like nothing has happened since 1980, that he knows nothing about what happened since 1980, and that he goes back to the Keynesian economics of the 1970s as if, is there anything else? And of course, that's ruining the country. That's why we had no recovery from the last recession. And now Bernanke is going to bring back inflation and the same cycles of the 1970s, which I've been predicting for 2 years.
Gold is at record levels.
Yes.
Unless you take into account inflation and revalue it based on the inflation rate. What is the danger of America being faced with hyperinflation?
Well, he's creating, because what happens is when he creates inflation to get out of the recession, he then has to decide, do I continue with that inflation, make it worse and worse, or do I let the economy go back into recession? Because when you solve the recession by inflation, when you stop the inflation, you go back into recession. And so he's going to be faced with that dilemma. You know, do I keep making the inflation worse and worse, or do I let the country go back into recession? Now, you can imagine how everything is going to break loose if the economy goes into another double-dip recession next year, which is what's going to happen unless they stop these Obama tax increases. Because what Obama has under his current policies is a tax increase across the board in the top tax rates for every major federal tax. The top 2 income tax rates are going up by nearly 20%. The capital gains tax is going up by over 60%. The tax on corporate dividends is going up nearly 3 times, from 15% to almost 45%. The Medicare payroll tax on upper income earners is going up 62%, and the death tax is going to rise from the grave at a top rate of 55%.
This is the year to die.
Right. This is the year. Yes, that's right, under the Obama regime. So now, if they raise those tax rates across the board, as Art Laffer says, you know, the economy is going to go back into recession. The deficit, instead of raising money for those tax increases, if the economy goes back into recession, they're going to lose money. The deficit is going to soar over $2 trillion, and this creates a risk that we will end up just like Greece, that people will not lend us that $2 trillion, and we will not be able to finance the budget. This creates a national defense risk as well, because our enemies know, you know, how did we win World War II? We borrowed 100% of GDP. That's how we won that war. If we're already at 100% of GDP,
gross domestic product,
everybody knows that we cannot finance a major war like that.
Now, What do you think of the move toward gold by the president of the World Bank?
Well, I think, of course, that's very sensible because he recognizes that what's going on here now is the Fed is stimulating a competitive devaluation of currencies. Other countries see this going on, and they fear they're going to lose their exports to American companies because their exports become cheaper when the dollar declines. So they're trying to make their currencies cheaper, and he sees this all spinning out of control into this great inflation scenario. And so he's trying to pull us back to the world back to some kind of link to gold as we had under the Bretton Woods system. And of course, that is what they need to do, is stabilize the value of the dollar. But instead, somehow Bernanke, too, is going back to the 1970s. There's no justification.
Peter, what are the real prospects of hyperinflation? And what can be done to prevent hyperinflation in America, which would mean, in effect, the total devaluation of the American dollar?
Well, once Bernanke goes down this road, then the threat of hyperinflation becomes very real, because once you use inflation to get out of the recession, then you have to keep pursuing that inflation, keep that monetary expansion going, because when you start to pull back to stop the inflation, you throw the economy back into recession. And Barack Obama, of course, is going to be very much against that, because if the economy goes back into recession next year, that's clearly not going to be Bush's fault. And how's he going to explain that?
Who were the wisest advisors Obama's had? Was Larry Summers a good advisor?
Larry Summers was always a hapless liberal. He was just the least nuts of all the advisors, but I was never happy with Larry Summers. He's an unrestricted Keynesian himself. He himself was far too liberal. He was just the least nuts of all the advisors. So we're in a very bad shape now. So the alternative to it is to not do what Bernanke's doing at all. You know, I would replace Bernanke immediately with John Taylor from Stanford. I would ask for Bernanke to resign. Or there are other people who, you know, you need to have a monetary policy that's focused on a stable dollar, keeping it from inflation or deflation, maintain a stable dollar, and then you need to cut the tax rates like Reagan did to give people incentives for savings and investment rather than raising them. He's doing, the key to Obama's policy is he's doing exactly the opposite of everything Reagan did. Every one of the four major components of Reaganomics, he's doing the opposite. And so he's going to have the opposite results.
How did Reagan get so smart?
Well, I mean, Reagan inherently had good sense, but I think he joined forces. He was smart enough to join forces with the supply-side movement, who understood economics better than anybody else. America was really in a lot of trouble by the end of the 1970s. The economy was being so trashed that it was becoming a national defense issue. We were having trouble keeping up with the Soviets at that point. And most of the establishment said, you can't fix it. You know, inflation is going to keep getting worse and worse, these inflation and recession, and there is no solution. And it was these very brave supply-siders who said, no, wait a minute, you need to have, you know, the combination of stable money and reduced tax rates to give the economy incentives. And this was contrary to all the establishment thinking at the time. They were ridiculed by the establishment thinkers. Reagan went with them anyway, and it was an amazing coup that, in fact, it was an enormous success. Inflation disappeared within 2 or 3 years, never to be heard from again until now. And the economy went off on this 25-year economic boom, what Art Laffer and Steve Morrow called the greatest period of wealth creation in the history of the planet. And what they did was truly remarkable, because they went against all the reigning thinking at the time. They were ridiculed, and they were outrageously successful. And Reagan had the good sense to recognize the value of what they were saying.
Well, Reagan was right to bring Dave Stockman into the woodshed, and that Stockman left. I don't know if you recently saw him on television, but he was saying crazy things about the need to raise taxes and so forth. What's happened to the guy? Stockman
never fully understood it. He was not part of the original supply-side cabal. While he was a decently good budget director in terms of wanting to cut government spending, he never understood the whole big picture. But it was really 4 components of Reaganomics, which is cutting government spending, cutting tax rates. Not, you know, Obama says, I gave everyone a tax cut. His tax cut is tax welfare. When you give people a tax credit that's refundable, it's indistinguishable from a welfare check. It's cut in tax rates. The third component was deregulation, and the fourth component was sound money, a stable, strong dollar, anti-inflation monetary policy. And those 4 components will create another 25-year boom if we do them again.
Very good. We have to take a break. Please stay with us. We'll be back right after these messages.
You are a defender of liberty. You spoke out.
That is part of your job.
You were heard in Congress.
No.
You marched. You created a new movement. You endured attacks.
You see folks waving tea bags around.
Now you can help to
Repeal the bill.
go to sendtheramessage.com. Print the pledge to repeal Obamacare. Send it to your representative, senators, and candidates to sign that they pledge to repeal the bill. Repeal the bill.
Repeal the bill. Repeal the bill. Repeal the bill. Repeal the bill. Repeal the bill. Repeal the bill.
Repeal the bill now.
Go to sendtheramessage.com and help.
Repeal the bill.
Hello, I'm Steve Forbes, chairman of Forbes Media, here to urge you to watch Conservative Roundtable if you want to learn about the issues that matter and what you can do to get our country back on the right track.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips with our special guest, Peter Ferrara, one of the nation's #1 constitutional conservative economists. And speaking of that, Peter, what would you do about the trillions of dollars in debt that we now confront? What would you do about federal spending?
Well, you know, I published an article in the Wall Street Journal a couple months ago, how to balance the budget. And, you know, the traditional Washington way of trying to balance the budget is you do a deal where you raise taxes and then you cut some spending. And the problem is they never really cut the spending. And even if they do, they wash it away in a couple of years. Whereas when they raise the taxes, they never get the revenue they expect to get out of the tax increase because of its negative effect on the economy. But they always budget for what they expect. So those deals never work for those two reasons. And so the only way you can balance, there's only one way you can balance the budget, which is you have to first cut tax rates to get the economy growing. Because you're never going to catch up with the weak revenues of a declining economy. So the economy needs to boom. And then you budget for the booming revenues and you cut spending so that the spending fits within the booming revenues.
Would you do an across-the-board cut, or would you limit it to certain areas?
I really like the idea of right now, and I've spoken with Paul Ryan, who's another person I'm close to.
Tremendous contributions he's made this year.
A few weeks ago, I met with him, and we discussed this idea of returning the spending for every federal line item except Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid back to the my pick is the 2007. I favor 2007. I calculated, looking at the budget, you would save $630 billion a year with that alone.
Wow.
And you know, America was fine with 2007. We don't need any more spending than that.
Why have, when Republicans have been in the White House, why haven't they even advocated a spending freeze?
Well, you know, I had a piece that I published in The Spectator a while back when the Republicans cut spending. And there are two times in history when they cut spending. One was under Reagan. If you go back to Reagan, he really took an axe to the federal discretionary spending. He cut it 14% in his first year, and it never grew back to the 1981 level. When he left, it was below the level it was in 81 in constant dollars. And then under Gingrich, when he was the Speaker of the House in the 1990s, from 1994 to 2000, again, under Reagan, total spending as a percent of GDP, even though he increased defense spending to win the Cold War without firing a shot, total federal spending as a percent of GDP climbed by 10%. That means government relative to the economy was reduced by 10%, even while fighting and winning the Cold War. And under Gingrich, it actually declined from 1994 to 2000 by a little more than that. It was like 13, 14% federal spending as a percent of GDP. So they did in those two instances. When you have leadership, the Republicans will cut spending. When you don't have real leadership under Hastert and Bush, you know, never ran against government spending, and he was not particularly interested in controlling it. And the Republicans in the Congress were more than glad to revert to the Democrats' vote-buying efforts. But when you have leadership, as you did with Reagan and Gingrich, they have cut spending.
Now, you have written a great deal about Social Security and how to address its problems. Why don't you encapsulate for us your recommendations concerning Social Security?
What you need to do with Social Security is give working people the freedom to choose a personal account option as an alternative to Social Security.
Steve Forbes has pushed this.
Steve Forbes has advanced this. They actually did this in Chile. The students of Milton Friedman went down to Chile and became the senior economist in the administration.
Pinochet was a pretty good leader.
Well, it was Jose Pinera was the Minister of Labor under Pinochet. He was the one who convinced them to do it. And also what Jose Pinera did is he went on TV weekly and convinced the working people that it was a good idea. And so in 1981, they gave them this freedom to choose. You can stay with the old system, or you can choose the personal account system. And what Jose Pinera says is they fled to the personal account system faster than people fled East Germany when the fall of the Berlin Wall. And within 18 months, 95% of the workers chose the personal account system. It's been an enormous success. Workers pay only half as much into the new system, yet get almost twice the benefits because, you see, Social Security actually makes no real investment at all. It's what's called a pay-as-you-go system. They take the money from you. They don't save it and invest it for you. They pay it to me today. So you don't get any returns at all. Whereas when you save and invest in the real market, you earn these returns. Those returns accumulate. And so, you know, I've done a lot of work showing that average working people would accumulate, if they could put all of the money into the personal accounts, close to $1 million or more over their lifetimes in this personal account system. They would get 2 to 3 times the benefits the Social Security promises.
Starting at what age?
That assumes they could do it their whole life.
Beginning when what?
When they enter the workforce at 20, 21, 22. I would make it proportional for everybody. If you went in later, you would get a proportion of your old benefits based on the old system, but you would get the new system. And so everyone would gain if you would give people the freedom to make that choice. This does more to reduce government spending than anything else because it doesn't just sort of cut the growth of Social Security spending. It shifts it out of the federal budget into the private sector. That's a massive reduction in government, biggest reduction in government spending in world history. And then imagine the change that would make in American society. For most working people, the biggest tax they pay is actually the Social Security payroll tax. Now, suppose that was all changed instead of a tax that's paid to somebody else into a family personal savings and wealth engine where they're saving and investing for their own family. What that would do to promote the family, what that would do to promote prosperity of the economy with all that money going into the economy, and everybody would share in the equal ownership, much more equal ownership in the private economy. Not on redistributing wealth, but by creating new wealth more equally distributed, which is the only way, really, to create more broader participation.
Under the present system, is it necessary to raise the entry age for Social Security benefits?
I wouldn't bother with that at all.
You wouldn't?
I would not. I would not have anything to do. I would say, because the personal account system reduces spending over the long run far more than anything else.
But if we don't have that system, and you were a member of Congress, would you be tempted with the idea of raising the age of entry from 62 or 65 to, say, 67?
If I was a member of Congress, I would be fighting for this personal account idea until I retired. So
there's some questions you can't honestly answer.
I mean, I would not. I don't really think it's a good idea to even talk about cutting benefits because you achieve far more ideologically with the personal accounts, and politically, the personal accounts are far more attractive than cutting government cutting the benefits because you actually get higher benefits with the personal accounts.
What would you do about Medicare?
Medicare, I would expand the personal accounts until they finance all of the benefits financed by the payroll tax today. So that would include part of Medicare too. Part of the payroll tax goes to finance Medicare. So that would go into a personal account. So part of the money in your personal account you would use to buy health insurance in retirement. And you take the general revenue finance part of Medicare and give people supplemental vouchers if they're lower income people to make sure that they could buy a good enough health care system. And this is very similar to what Paul Ryan does. Not the same, but similar.
In my view, unemployment insurance is not only unwise and inappropriate, it's unconstitutional. What would you do to the people who say we've got to give unemployment insurance to people who've been out of work for an extended period?
Well, you know, in the unemployment insurance system, first of all, the whole idea that you're going to extend the benefits to, it's now, what, 2 years or something of unemployment insurance? You know, if you have a sound economic policy, then you don't have the unemployment insurance, not the big concern. But that relates to my welfare reform because I would change the welfare system to a welfare system solely based on work. And so that, what Newt Gingrich said recently is give people 4 weeks of unemployment insurance because the data shows that most people don't start to look for a job until they have 4 weeks of unemployment insurance left. So give them 4 weeks of unemployment insurance, and after that, you have a guaranteed job where they can go to, and you know that's how he suggested he would reform the system. But I think you got to change the whole welfare system to be one based on work, and that would displace most of this.
What can be done about Obamacare?
Well, you know, I published that book, The Obamacare Disaster, and I go through the whole discussion of what the legislation does and how the cruel perversion at the heart of Obamacare is that it promises health coverage to everybody, but it attacks the ability of the system to provide the health care to the people who are the sickest and most vulnerable. And this is what the American healthcare system does much better than anybody else in the world, is it provides this heroic medicine to the sickest people in the country. You know, they can put a pacemaker in your heart now. Your doctor can monitor your heart online, and he can call you in the morning and say you're going to have a heart attack today. I recently heard about somebody who that happened to, in fact, and they saved his life as a result. Where do you think that comes from? That doesn't grow on a tree somewhere. That comes from billions of dollars of investment. But who's going to make that investment when the government's running the system and the government doesn't want to pay for that? You think about the logic of socialized medicine. Why do all these programs end up rationing health care? It's what I call the political logic of socialized medicine. They don't want to spend all that money on the sickest people because they can buy more votes with that money spending it elsewhere. Sick people are not good political bets because, you know, you're not a good political activist if you have cancer or heart disease. You might be dead before the next election. You can't vote for them anyway. Better to take that money away from them and spend it on healthy people and buy more votes elsewhere. And that's exactly what Obamacare does, and that's what every socialized medicine plan does. In this book, I not only explain what's wrong with Obamacare, I outline the alternatives. And I'm in favor of a health care safety net, which says, okay, I don't want to believe in saying to people, you know, we're going to deny anybody essential health care, have them die or whatever. So you have Medicaid, block grant Medicaid back to the states, let the states decide how much assistance they're going to provide people to buy private health insurance at what income level, that each state make that decision. For people who get too sick to buy insurance, you have a state uninsurable risk pool where they can go, they pay for some of their health care, that's subsidized. So you have a safety net to ensure people can get health insurance, and you don't need to have the government take over health care, involve this rationing, 159 new agencies, bureaucracies, boards and commissions of Obamacare. You don't need any of that. You don't need $1 trillion of increased spending. In fact, you actually reduce spending if you do this right, and you would have everybody covered. It actually would not be that expensive to deal with the problem of the uninsured.
We're going to be back right after these messages. Stay with us, and we'll have some closing comments by Peter Ferrara.
Hey, listen, this is the greatest thing. I want to tell you something. Something's happening in this country. And I want to tell you, look around my friends here. My friends here in Washington, come over here. See all these great people? These great folks are here because they want to take the country back to the direction of the Founding Fathers and stop all this nonsense that's going on and stop this, this immersion into socialism, which is happening. We've got to stop it. And every day we're losing a little bit of our freedom. But the answer is that the individual citizens can make a difference. They can walk through these houses of Congress. They can look their congressman in the eye and say, hey, vote this bill down. Get rid of it. We got a lot of work to do. And the first thing we have to do is get rid of the garbage and the attacks on our freedoms. This is it. So anyway, that's what these guys are doing here today to do. Yes! And I say, all of you guys out there, with the sound of my voice and the visual that this great gentleman has created, get down here and do your responsible citizenship by going and seeing your representatives and telling them, what you want, because this is your house. It's not their house. Yeah. Get in there and tell them what to do, and let's begin cleaning this country up. A big mess has been created in only a year's time, in 9 months' time, really. A big mess we have to recover from. We got to start work. We got to throw some people out. So anyway, I love this country. I love you. Go do your job.
Thank you for your help. Thank you.
Welcome back. If you're interested in the kinds of issues we discuss on Conservative Roundtable, write down our fax number, 703-281-4108. Send us your contact information. Without cost or obligation, we'll send you more information. And if you want to learn more from Peter Ferrara, just check out the contact information for him, which now appears on the screen. We'd appreciate your parting comments, Peter.
Well, you know, it's a very exciting time because what Obama has done is awakened the country, and he's created the opportunity for us to have much more dramatic reforms than even we'd had under Reagan in the 80s or Gingrich in the 90s, where there's an opportunity for this personal account idea I was discussing before, where you eventually increase the personal accounts until they finance everything that's financed by the payroll tax today, and everybody is accumulating their own family wealth, and instead of paying the payroll tax, which for most working people is the biggest tax they pay, they actually have their own, accumulating their own share of American business and industry. Dramatic reduction in government spending, dramatic reduction in taxes just from that alone. The other opportunity that's out there for a big change in the welfare state comes from the welfare reform of 1996, where they took one of the New Deal programs, the old Aid to Families with Dependent Children program, a big failure, AFDC. They block granted that back to the states, as Reagan and his welfare guru Bob Carlson had long wanted. And it was astoundingly successful. 2/3 of the people on that program beforehand went out to work and got off of that welfare program, and the spending on the program after 12 years was half of what it would have been under the old program.
Peter, we could talk for a lot more time, but our program is just about over. Thank you very much for joining us and sharing your wisdom with us. And I hope you'll be with us again for the next edition of Conservative Roundtable.